Hey everyone, Sleepy Reader here. I want to share some thoughts on some non-Rebirth comics, some non-superhero comics for the most part, indie comics as we like to call them. So exactly how indie can Godzilla be? Is IDW an indie comic company when they are publishing a licensed product? Godzilla is big business somewhere in the world. Anyway, that said, I enjoyed Godzilla Across Time a lot. This is an amazing cover painted by Bob Eggleton, I think is the way you say his name. He's usually known as a science fiction illustrator, but he illustrated one of the Godzilla in Hell. He painted one of the Godzilla in Hell issues, and now he's done this cover. I don't know if he's done other IDW covers. This one looks really cool, especially in person. I'd love to see the original painting. I wonder how big it is. Inside is an entirely different style, kind of mimicking old Japanese art to some degree, trying to give the flavor of, older Japanese ink art, I think, old prints and the like. So it's a tale of feudal Japan and an attack by giant monsters and Godzilla's eventual involvement in that attack and how he, not really on purpose, ended up saving Japan from the invaders. Who were the invaders? Now I've forgotten. And then it turns out all of this is part of someone's historical research into Godzilla. So, trying to decide, are these things myths? Was Godzilla really there? And so the next issue will be Godzilla in some other time in history, written and drawn by a different artistic team. And that's kind of a fun concept. It wasn't, the most enthralling story in the world, but it was a fun Godzilla story. And I look forward to seeing what they're doing next. I added this to my pull list. Let's see. Another one I just added to my pull list, got yesterday and read already. It's a very quick read, Skyborn by Frank Cho, written and drawn by Frank Cho, with the colorist Marcio Menez. If anything, the coloring is the least strong part of this. Cho is a really good visual storyteller, so he doesn't need a lot of words, and when he does have dialogue, he doesn't overdo it too much. And this is very fast-paced. It does feel kind of cinematic, like a pitch for a movie, but in a good way. It doesn't lose out on quality comic book storytelling either. So I added this to my pull list. I think this turned out to be cover C. I wish I wasn't rushing through my comic book store. I really like the main cover that I've seen other people show, but this cover's okay. And here's an ad for something that I think I'm going to have to get. Tarzan on the Planet of the Apes. Written by Tim Seeley, so that's kind of promising. This is 5 issues, so it would make sense just to wait for the trade, but it's a lot of fun to read, so I'm just going to go for the more expensive floppies. One that I am very close to adding to my pull list, but I think I will wait for the trade, is Eclipse. It also, the Cho book was a $3.99 book. This is a $3.99 book from Top Cow / Image. It's something's happened to the sun and it burns life, so everyone has to live underground, and there's a murder mystery. Who is killing people by exposing them to the sun and writing biblical stuff on the walls in their blood. And there's a rich man who runs one of the corporations that's left, I guess, in this underground world, whose daughter seems to be being stalked by this killer. And what's the right word? A kind of burnt out, hard-boiled hero who's one of the people who is an expert on going up onto the surface when the sun is out in one of these cold suits. So it's a very good, well thought out science fiction story, and I probably will need to, brace myself to wait for the trade. But for $4, you get 20 pages, and while the art was good, I wouldn't say it totally, sometimes the art's just so good that I've got to have the single issues, but I think it's good enough to tell the story, but I think I can wait. I haven't read the back matter here yet. That's kind of interesting that they include that, so maybe that makes up a little bit for less pages. But that was a good read. And sorry, I'm just flipping through what I've got in front of me. Paper Girls, the pink issue. The science fiction just got heavier, but not well explained yet. I'm feeling patient and assume that it will be explained better. There's an interesting twist. There's now 3 versions of this character, Aaron, and the secret message saying don't trust the other Aaron. So which one of the 3 is the other Aaron? I thought that was very cool. But I do feel like I have to wait for future issues to decide if all of this is going to make sense or not. Kaiju Max, the latest issue. Just when you think, how much more can Xander Cannon do with his basic idea of giant kaijus, giant monsters being treated as criminals rather than just monsters, and the people on parole and the law enforcement officers and the prison guards and all of that. We get a new, very interesting twist here that gives us a nice flip of expectations and paints everything in a new color. I mean, black and white on the cover, but things aren't black and white. But they are darker again. So Xander Cannon does a great job of turning his cartoony world into something very dark and, full of no clear answers in a good way. So I still highly recommend Kaiju Max, but it may be something that makes more sense, fits only a limited group of people's tastes for black humor involving these kinds of subjects. I don't know, but I really love it. Okay, this last week's issue of Saga is forever going to be burned in my mind as the erect penis issue. I'm having trouble remembering what else happened in this issue, except they show us a huge close-up of an erect penis that is Prince Robot's erect penis. It's Saga's latest shock. Every issue has to, or almost every issue has to have some shocking image and shocking kind of thing in your face. And it kind of was an interesting character moment, I guess. It also played on the very old, hoary joke about, that rocket ships are like penises. That's why us boys like science fiction. We like to shoot off our penises into outer space. But is it playing with that, or is it just going for the easy, both the easy shock and the easy metaphor? I don't know. I can't make up my mind. Is this puerile and stupid, or is it clever? Is it shocking, or is it just, in bad taste? Or is it in good taste? Is it good to get us all looking at erect penises and people having trouble with their sexual functioning? I don't know. Other than that, we had some... God, I really can't remember all of this. Trying to remember if did I actually read the whole thing? Yeah, I did, because I remember the ending. That's funny, I'm flipping through pages, and I'm having trouble remembering this part, but Yeah, there's some interesting twists, and there's some creatures that show up on the at the end that I'm looking forward to learning more about. I hope, when at this latest shocking scene, I kind of thought, well, maybe this has jumped the penis, maybe it's jumped the shark, maybe there's, not enough story left to tell. But I think I'll keep reading it. I think there is. But it's kind of in a lull again where it feels like they're wandering around for what's the next thing that's going to happen. But there's a lot of interest. There's so many interesting characters here. And I do like Prince Robot and his son. And is it Gus? So I want all these characters to be explored more. And I really hope that they do explore the characters. The characters are the strength here, not the shocking moments. Lake of Fire was another really good one. It's on my pull list. Turns out to only be a 5-issue story, but I think that's what the writer said on Twitter. But that's 5 issues, with the first issue being a double-sized, super chunky, thick issue. So it's like a trade of 6 issues, and even there, like as you can see, each page is very dense. It kind of reminds me of some sort of European album comics that I've read, so there's a lot there. A lot of story, a lot of character, complex historical background that I believe is fairly accurate, aside from the appearance of the aliens. And I think that, should this sell well, they might do another series, and I hope that's the case, if the plot that they have in mind will leave room for another series. It definitely makes me feel like I am really glad I did not live in the late Middle Ages. And there's so many, in Europe anyway, there's so many yucky things about that culture and society that our culture and society came out of, that even though there are sympathetic characters in this, it's also interesting, I feel, how Nathan Fairborn, who's known as a colorist but does an awesome job as a writer here, and he is the colorist, how he takes characters that are like out of, the fictional stories, like Ivanhoe type of characters, and mixes them with some more of the nasty sides of the reality of this world. And then there's the nasty side of a kind of alien invasion story. So we got kind of fairy tale mixed with reality, mixed with science fiction, and it's a really good mix, really good book. And one other thought I had about it, and maybe part of why it reminded me of like the European album, it didn't have those snappy, slick American, the current American style plot beats that are supposed to propel you from one scene to the next. And although I think it does end, well, the aliens attack at the end, and someone's life is at stake right at the end. But it deals in a lot of smaller details and moments, even though it's a big story. And I really appreciate that. It was a breath of fresh air in a way. It was good storytelling without the current formula of the way storytelling is done in American comics right now. Speaking of unusual storytelling, even at DC Comics, Peter Tomasi often veers a bit in and out of the formulas, and this is a very non-formula book, the House of Penance. There's only one more issue to go, and things just are getting more and more crazy, especially visually. And I've only recently learned that apparently this is based on a real situation, the Winchester house, and an heir to the Winchesters, the gun family, who went crazy and thought that really did. So a lot of this stuff is stuff she really believed in real life. I think I'm going to wait till I read the whole series before I look into what the supposed real story would have been. But it impresses me even more that this is based on a real story but feels so fictional, if you know what I mean. they let themselves, the writer and artist, go free with the crazy dreamlike quality of this thing that's based on a real person's life. So in a way that makes this an even more awesome book for me. How it will end, I can't imagine, you know, without knowing what the real story is and whether they'll veer off of where the real story ended. I assume it ends with either someone going in a mental hospital or dying or both. Anyway, really cool book. I'm kind of appreciating books that are terminal. It seems like Lake of Fire and Skybound and House of Penance, they're all miniseries, and that is feeling like a really good thing to me right now in indie comics. I think I, in another video, expressed some frustration with some books that just seem to go on and whose stories really needed to be wrapped up. Which kind of makes an interesting segue into Kill or Be Killed #2, just because I know that Brubaker has announced this as an ongoing, and reading the first issue, I couldn't imagine how it could be an ongoing. And in the second issue, I can see how he could stretch the story out for more than 6 issues now because of the way he's laying things out, he being Brubaker, and of course his artist Sean Phillips. But it still feels like a story with one main note to it that needs to be explored and then resolved. So we'll see. I mean, it might be that Brubaker is fooling himself in saying this is an ongoing. He may get to the end of, you know, issue 15 and realize, okay, I'm done now. We'll see. One interesting thing that it looks really nice, the way there's illustrations in the middle and text down the sides, but it really does take me out of the comic book experience. It becomes an illustrated book because I'm reading the text and then I'm looking over at the drawings, then I'm reading the text, then I'm looking over at the drawings. I'm not experiencing the text and the drawings together. And it may or may not be my imagination because Sean Phillips has a very, you know, intense illustrative style, but he usually is a really good storyteller too. But I feel at least I imagine it just falls into a more static illustrative style on these pages, and there are a lot of these pages in here. It's an interesting story. I don't give a hoot about these characters yet. There's a heartbreaking child in here that captures my sympathy for a minute, but it's really kind of a minor detail. And our main character and the girl who he has a crush on, who may or may not like him, and his roommate who doesn't really show up in this issue, and those are all the characters. And those 3 characters, none of them have my sympathy or empathy or anything yet. And I can't buy into his rationalizations for killing people yet. And it is interesting, the moral gray area of the first person he chooses to kill. So, yeah, I'm left feeling a little doubtful about this book. On the writing level, I love the art. Is Brubaker going off in a direction that's not his strength? We'll see. The worst case scenario for me is I buy the first 5 or 6 issues, whatever will be the first trade, and then I switch to trade waiting for it. I'll still want to read it and see what he's up to. Finally, very briefly, it's indie comics, Spawn, owned by the creators. The 2 creators working together here, Eric Larson and Todd McFarlane, both of whom I admire for they've stuck to their guns and they've remained indie creators all this time since they first formed Image. So I admire them as innovators in the field on a creative. I like their art and I like their business sense. I'm not so sure about them as writers. Things worked while Spawn was in hell for me, but now that Spawn is just kind of working his way through his mission back on Earth, and he seems to think it's a group of bad guys, but there's nothing really clear and explained, and there's lots of text, there's lots of captions all over this artwork, and yet things aren't explained very much for me, the words aren't adding to the pictures. Sometimes they're almost subtracting. They're just telling you what's happening in the pictures. They aren't adding something else to the pictures. But it's not horrible. It's a pretty good superhero story, but I don't know whether I need it. So I think issue 266 will be Eric Larson's last issue, and I might choose that as a good cutting off point. And I don't have it on my pull, but they're going to cross over to Savage Dragon for one issue, so I have to pick up that issue too to get the full story. Maybe I should look into getting Savage Dragon. It might be the Eric Larson part of this in terms of the writing that I liked better. Maybe he did more of the writing in the Hell part. I'm not sure. It was interesting and fun to see the two of them collaborate. But once they stop collaborating, I'm not sure if there's enough going on here for me to stick with it. Okay, that's my run through of a bunch of stuff I've read lately. There's a lot more I've read that I could talk about, but those seem like the more interesting ones. And so I've been doing a lot of videos lately, and Rose City Comic Con's coming up. I will try to do videos with Matt Wednesday Serial, pictures of him falling down drunk or whatever it is that he's going to do, and maybe some kind of collaboration with Eric Longbox review, although he'll be here with his family, so I assume he'll be more busy, wife and kids, grandkids actually. So talk to you all later. Bye-bye.